Welcome back. Now, are you happy with how CDF is being run within your constituency? Many have expressed concern over the way CDF is operating in their constituencies, and that is the issue we want to discuss in studio this morning. To understand more about this, Kitty, we have the CEO of the National Government Constituencies Development Fund Board, Yusuf Mbuno. Good morning, and thank you for making time for us on News Center this morning.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. Thank you for welcoming me.
Absolutely.
To the studio. Thank you.
Now, many people know about CDF, the Constituency Development Fund, although many do not understand how it works. This has since been renamed NG-CDF, Non-Governmental Constituency Development Fund. Talk to us about the evolution of this fund.
A National Government Constituency Development Fund is established pursuant to an Act of Parliament, the National Government Constituency Development Fund Act of 2015, of course, as per the amendment of 2016. And this fund is meant to ensure that the community felt needs have a mechanism of being addressed. That through the fund, wananchi have an avenue where they can put their requests and have their needs addressed. It's a fund that started way back in 2003. It's now about 17 years. No, this is the 17th year, the 2019-2020 financial year.
Right.
Will be the 17th year. Initially, we had the CDF Act, as people popularly know it. That's a Constituency Development Fund, right, by the Act of 2003, which served us well. It has undergone several amendments. In 2007, we had some minor amendments which brought some change. Key among them is establishment of a board of directors to manage the fund. Initially, we had an interagency committee known as a National Management Committee that managed the fund. Of course, the first 5 years, but based on the lesson learned, it was found necessary to establish the board and, of course, strengthen the management of the fund.
Right.
In 2013, we had the CDF Acts of 2013, which was done. It was an amendment that done. Actually, it was a new act, which was done through repealing of the earlier act of 2003. The idea was to align our acts to the new constitution of Kenya 2010, which actually brought a lot of fundamental changes. Key among them, the issue of separation of power, which has been a question in terms of the management of the fund. How does it respect the requirement that the three arms of government operate together but independently? However, in 2014, the matter of the new act was taken to court, and for 2 years the matter was being discussed. However, in that's February 2015, the High Court pronounced itself, declaring that the act of 2013 was unconstitutional, and there were various reasons for that. Key among them was the issue of course, the separation of powers, I'd already mentioned. The key also issue of respecting the delineation of functions between the two levels of government as anticipated in the Constitution. Of course, there was also the issue of how the fund is budgeted. In a way, it was felt that it was introducing a third level of government, because now we had the national government, devolved governments, and then the CDF then. Therefore, the perception was that dividing the money between the three levels, it means that now there will be a third level of government.
All right.
However, we were given, the court was magnanimous enough to give us 1 year period to remedy the defects, and the National Assembly passed the new act now, the National Government Constituency Development Fund Act of 2015, which addressed the key issue of separation of powers. Now it's very clear there is separation of the role of legislature, that's the members of parliament, whose important role in the fund focuses on legislation, representation and oversight.
All right, and we'll get to more of that and how the members of parliament come in. But this is a fund that consists of monies that amount to not less than 2.5% of all national government's share of revenue, and that's quite a lot of money. But what is the purpose, really, of this fund? The purpose of this fund is to, actually it's a poverty-focused fund.
is to address poverty by ensuring that the programs that are perceived to be necessity at the grassroots level have an avenue of being implemented. And like the name suggests, it's a national government fund. That means in line with the new constitution now, we no longer finance functions which are, as per the constitution, are set aside for county governments.
Right.
Matters like health, water, we don't. We focus on national government functions. But of course, the functions must be those which are felt at community level. So there must be project ideas that are addressing needs which can be seen at community level. We get proposals from community through community participation process.
Right.
And over time, I would say, like currently for the last 4 years, over 83% of the projects that we do are only in 2 areas. That is on education, which takes about 69% of the funds, and then national security, including national administration, which takes about 15%.
Right.
So I would say that is where the projects are leaning towards, because those are the views we get from Wananchi. But however, the Act itself says that the projects that are fundable under this Act shall be those ones that address the needs or the functions of national government as per the Constitution. That's the first criteria. The other criteria is that the projects must be community-based, so that the benefits are accruing to a wide cross-section of inhabitants of a particular area. That means the target should be the wider community, not a narrow section of the community.
Right, so you talk about education taking a larger chunk of it, and issues like security. We'll get to whether there are any issues or any measures put in place to ensure that perhaps this could shift from education to other developmental needs, especially focused on the Big Four agenda. But even before that, talk to us about the allocation criteria that is used here, because previously we've seen even members of parliament, come into a war of words over CDF with bigger constituencies expecting bigger allocations. What is the allocation criteria?
I think the fund has evolved over time. Initially, we used to have the fund, which, like you rightly said, is a minimum of 2.5% of national government share of revenue, as determined by the Division of Revenue Act every year. That is enacted pursuant to Section 2, Article 218 of the Constitution. Right. Initially, the amount set aside for the fund used to be shared among constituencies, such that 75% was being shared equally, and 25% was being shared based on poverty index. But from 2016, that formula changed. So now the amount set aside to this kitty, after setting aside a little percentage, which cannot be more than 5% for the national board for the administration of the fund, the remaining is now shared equally among all constituencies. That means once we net off the money that we require for the national board to administer the fund, the remaining is just divided by the 290 constituencies. And that's how we get the amount that each constituency gets. All right.
We're talking to Yusuf Mbuno, CEO of the National Government Constituency Development Fund Board. And we're asking you on our Twitter poll question today, are you happy with the way CDF is administered in your constituency? Are you happy with the way the Constituency Development Fund is administered in your constituency? That has since been renamed into the National Government Constituency Development Fund. Do speak to us. Our hashtag is KTN News Center. You can also speak to me directly at Michelle Ngele or at KTN News Kenya. We'll be sampling some of your thoughts and comments in the course of this live discussion. Now, as you mentioned, this began back in 2003, where, it's then known as CDF. So we're talking about almost 17 years, like you say. Talk to us about some of the successes that this fund has witnessed.
Some of the successes, I think the fund has come a long way. And I want to say the main purpose of this fund is to supplement national government efforts towards community development. And to that end, I would say that we are proud that we have achieved a lot. Currently, the government is focusing on ensuring that there's 100% transition from primary school to second school. I will tell you that that achievement is greatly contributed by this fund. We have part of the fund which goes to the especially in education infrastructure, building classrooms, which maybe if I may give to put figures to that, and just so that you see the magnitude of our contribution. For example, 2017-2018 financial year alone, through this fund, we managed to build a total of 3,930 classrooms across the country.
Right.
If you multiply that one by 40 students per classrooms, you see that in that year alone, we managed to create additional space for 157,000 students in the country. So you can imagine how, you can see now how we are contributing. In a period of just 2 years, you'd expect that one to go to over 300,000 additional students accommodated. And therefore, I would say that for what the government has achieved in terms of improving enrollment, improving retention of students to school, improvement of transition from primary to secondary education, which we are targeting to have 100, really the KITI National Government CDF contributes a lot. In terms of education, apart from the infrastructure, we also have the bursary component, which by law cannot exceed 35% of the amount allocated to a constituency in any one financial year. That money mostly goes towards financing the very poor kids who would not have access to education, both at secondary school level and even in tertiary institutions. And that fund has really helped a lot to ensure that we improve not only enrollment but retention of the students at school, and therefore also contributed to improvement of the completion rates and and of course generally the improvement of education in the country.
Right. 100% transition rate from primary to secondary school then increases the number of graduates we have at the end of the education chain. But education, aside, the issue of unemployment and the issue of lack of capital to finance several SMEs has been a bigger issue. Do you think there's likely to be a reverse from education consuming the largest share of this fund and perhaps other sectors getting more priority, say the enterprise sector?
That's likely to go by just the direction the country is taking. If you look at Vision 2030, definitely the structure of the economy is expected to change by the year 2030. Currently, we are depending on agriculture. We are now transiting to industrialization. We're going to have more people moving to urban areas. So definitely the priorities are going to change. But for now, and I'm seeing it for some years to come, not less than 20 years, education is going to remain the key here, because the problems are many, and we still have a lot of people who cannot be able to access education without government support.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll definitely, as the economy transitions, we expect some changes, and of course the Act is dynamic. The Parliament is there to ensure that the Act is always amended to or guided to follow the needs of the people, because like I say, this fund is there to ensure that it addresses the needs of the wananchi at any one particular moment.
The biggest frustration about the Constituency Development Fund previously has been public participation, or lack of it, therefore, with many saying there seems to be a problem of public participation in both identification and implementation of these projects. Talk to us about what the fund, or the board at least, has done to ensure that there is more wananchi participation in identification of these projects.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. And it's one of the aspects of the fund that are really not understood. Actually, by the architecture of the fund and the Act, it's meant to ensure that people themselves take the central role in management of the fund. From identification, the law requires that every 2 years, the constituency committee that is established to govern the fund in every constituency calls wananchi in every ward and gets their views about what kind of project they want implemented.
Right.
And the board has guided constituencies to ensure that they take those views and translate them into a strategic plan that the constituency is going to implement for the next 5 years. And that one ensures that it is the people's view that govern what we finance from time to time. We also ensure that wananchi participate in the projects, even not only from identification, but even in the implementation itself. In fact, Section 36 of the Act requires that the implementation of the projects under this fund is done by the community themselves. The communities have to elect a committee, which we call Project Management Committee, or PMC in brief. And that is the committee that implements the fund. the projects under the fund. In fact, the money that we give from the national board, it goes to the constituency account, bank account managed by the constituency committee. And by the way, the constituency committee draws membership from the wananchi themselves, from that particular constituency. So again, it's also participatory. But that constituency committee does not implement. It takes the money back to where the project idea came from the wananchi. So if it's a school, the money is given as grants to the school committees, which now become the project management committee. And the work of the constituency committee is to monitor and to receive reports and to ensure the project committees have the necessary capacity to be able to not only implement the projects but maintain adequate record for future review, and of course to be able to give feedback to the board through the constituency committee. I also want to point out that by design, this fund is meant to ensure that even the implementation itself, we use the local resources. Unlike other interventions by other agencies, most of our projects are even done through labor contracts, whereby you have the committees buy materials from the local hardware. That's promoting local community. You employ the local artisans, and therefore wananchi are able to feel that they really are part and parcel of this program. And of course, the mechanism or the structure of the fund also gives wananchi opportunity to also give us feedback on not only what they want, but even if they feel things are not going right, they have mechanisms of getting back to us. And actually, many of the cases that were pursued, in a few cases whereby funds may not have been utilized well, are as a result of whistleblowing by wananchi. So they have a big role to play in ensuring that this fund is efficiently managed.
Right, and still on these white elephant projects that may come up of these funds, how close are you in cooperation with relevant government agencies to ensure that implementation of these projects has impact for the mwananchi? So you're not just building classrooms that do not have teachers, or not just building schools that do not have the necessary infrastructure to facilitate learning in that instance, for example.
I think it's a concern. We have done many projects, especially education projects, but find a challenge in terms of staffing. Of course, there's need for that synchronization of the pace of development, and of course the staffing to ensure that the institution are operationalized. But I want to say the biggest need is, in terms of education, is access. You talk about access, of course quality is important, quality follows next. And as students or a community that cannot access education, the most important thing is to have the school near them, and to enable the children who don't have gone to school to be able to access education. And of course the parents have shown a lot of support for that, because in many schools where the TSC has not been able to post teachers, parents have employed teachers. We have many teachers who are employed by Board of Management. Of course, I know it's a challenge, but to me, I think it's a positive step, because you are able to have the schools there, and they are accessible to the students. But of course, we need to be innovative. Some of the strategy that we are thinking as a board is to strike a balance between starting new schools and expanding opportunities by building additional streams in the existing schools. Because if you put an additional stream in an existing school, it means that you may not need, for example, to employ additional teachers. Those teachers who are there might just have to maybe stretch themselves a bit and be able to teach the students. Even if you employ additional teachers by Board of Management of the schools, but you might find, maybe, for example, the principal will be the same, the libraries will still be the same, the laboratories, they'll be able to share. So those are the kind of strategies we are looking at, so that we balance between the need to expand the spaces, the opportunities for education, and of course stretching the ability of the government also to post teachers to be able to run the schools.
All right, let's talk more about the board of which you are the CEO. And before we get to the, who the board comprises of, what has the board done to ensure that this fund is also devoid of issues like corruption, which have come up before?
So corruption is a big problem all over the world. Of course, in the country, we talk about corruption every day. And even from the national board, that's a matter that we are concerned about. We have strengthened monitoring and build capacity of the constituency committees to monitor the projects. In every constituency, we have an officer of the board. We call them the fund managers, who are there to ensure that they track the expenditures, building the capacity by training of the project management committee so that they give us feedback, so that we have reports. We also have our audit. By law, this fund is audited by the Auditor General. And by the way, every year, each constituency submits a separate report to the Auditor General, and we are able to get feedback from the Auditor General, which goes to Parliament. And that ensures that there is accountability to the people of Kenya through the National Assembly of what is happening. Of course, in addition to that, the National Treasury has got a department of the Internal Auditor General that also looks at our fund and gives necessary feedback to the National Treasury, copy it to the National Board. And even to supplement that, within the National Government CDF Board, we have an internal audit department that every year visits not less than 120 constituencies to go and assess the utilization of the fund and give the board assurance of, in terms of proper utilization of the fund. Right. And in the board, we have an audit committee that receives those reports and recommends to the board appropriately. And we also work very closely with other organizations like the DCI, the Police in General, and the EACC. So where cases have been reported to us through the audit process of misuse of funds, we work with those agencies, and we have many cases of prosecution which have taken place. Yeah, but I would want to say that as a board, we want to focus more on issue of corruption prevention, because it's easier to improve management of the fund by ensuring that we put strong institutions to ensure that we prevent misuse of funds.
All right. Finally, it is a fund, National Government Constituency Development Fund. So all the 47 county governments are represented here. Who are the members of this board? And is the country represented in terms of marginalized communities? And how are you likely to make your presence felt?
Maybe I'll look at that question from two levels. At the national board level, of course, the board is composed of 11 members, 4 of who are representing the Attorney General and the Principal Secretaries in the key ministries, especially Education, Planning and National Treasury. And we have 7 people who are appointed by the Cabinet Secretary from the community. And the law ensures that that membership represents the national diversities, so that it has geographical representation, and also it has got focus on the marginalized people, the disadvantaged people. Like there must be one person from the persons with disability, and of course half of those members must be from either gender. So they start architecture of the act to ensure that the board is all inclusive. At the constituency level, the committee is composed of 10 members, 2 of whom are ex-official, that's the Deputy County Commissioner and our fund manager at constituency level. But there are 8 other people who are appointed from among the community. And the law requires that at least one should be a person with disability. And the people must be drawn from all communities in that area, of course respecting diversities, including minorities, and to ensure that either gender is represented in 50-50 level. All right. So we have a very inclusive system to ensure that everybody feels represented. All
right. Many thanks. For the purpose of time, we'll have to end that interview here. That is Yusuf Mbuno, who is the CEO of the National Government Constituencies Development Fund.